Alright guys, gonna be talking about common first generation R6 issues and how to solve some of those problems, and some products I like to use to keep my bike running as best it can. And a lot of this is basically focused towards carb bikes. However, a lot of this is applicable to fuel injected bikes as well. So if you're a fuel injected guy, you should probably stick around, check this out. Some of this stuff could help you out. Alright, so right off the bat, general maintenance is really important with these bikes. I think a big problem with a lot of these sport bikes is they're basically owned by people who really don't understand how a four-stroke motor works. They don't understand the fundamentals of it. And in my opinion, these are some of the most complicated engines out there. They're very highly tuned. You're talking about a bike that, some of the newer bikes are shifting at 17,000 RPM. I mean, that's eye-watering RPM. And getting into the carbureted bikes, I mean, that's kind of amazing when you stop and think about, a carburetor that can idle at 1200 RPM and still deliver fuel at 15,000, 15.5. I mean, that's pretty insane. So, gonna dive right into this. First thing you have to stay on top of is your general maintenance, so that's getting into changing your spark plugs, that's getting into your air filter, your fuel filter, and all that good stuff, carburetor adjustment, carburetor maintenance. So the first thing you might want to do if you pick up one of these bikes and you're really not interested in pulling the carbs apart, although I feel like that's kind of necessary, but this might help somebody not have to pull a carb apart. First thing I get into is picking up like an actual fuel system cleaner. I don't know if it really matters with the brand. I picked up this new Marvel Ultimate fuel system cleaner. That stuff's pretty awesome. So your first fuel system cleaning, I would use something more concentrated. And then, after you run a tank of the concentrated fuel system cleaner in there, Stable's got this new product, this 360. And, a lot of you guys might be familiar with Stable from, winterizing your bike and storing it. And I've actually really gotten into using this 360 Marine on pretty much everything I have. So it's going in my Lincoln, it's going in the R6, it's going in both my Mustangs. And the reason I went with the Marine is, it says that it can remove water, and it's more concentrated than this 360 Performance is. So for me, having all my fleet maintenance, it just works out better having a more concentrated formula. And I mean, I've used Stable for years, probably actually almost 2 decades. And it's kind of funny, I was just talking to my dad about this earlier this morning. My lawnmower, I bought that lawnmower that I have in 2004, and I've literally never taken the bowl off the carburetor on that lawnmower. And my dad seems like he's always having issues with his lawnmower. So, and I was talking to him today, it's like every time I turn around, he's pulling that bowl off and screwing around with the carburetor. And I was like, do you use any of this fuel stabilization products? And he's like, no, I never really use that stuff. And it's like, well, you might want to get into doing that, because, I mean, in my opinion, I've had really great luck with it. So, I'm kind of happy that Stable came out with this 360 version, because it just seems like a good idea to stabilize your fuel. And you also have to bear in mind that, fuel just goes bad over time. And the worst part about it is the most volatile part of that fuel is going to evaporate the quickest. So think about that. If the incredibly volatile part of that fuel is gone, it's going to be a lot harder to initiate combustion. So, there's a lot of this and that about fuel and ethanol and all that kind of stuff on YouTube. I mean, you could drive yourself crazy going through that stuff. But I mean, for me personally, I've always used the Stable products. I've had really good luck with them. And I just started using that 360. I probably got almost a month into using that now. So far, I'm pretty happy with it. So, make sure you keep your fuel system clean. Get in there and change that fuel filter. It's just stuff that people overlook. And I mean, let's face it, these bikes, they get neglected, and most of the time they're just sitting. So get into the basic maintenance of doing your oil changes, going through your filters. Is your air filter dirty? Check out the air box. you know, pull the spark plugs, check out your spark plugs. I mean, I like to change the spark plugs every year. You know, I like to do like a little spring tune-up. Unfortunately, this year I didn't really get around to doing that. I had too many other things going on, but you know, my spring tune-up is getting the plugs out of there, putting new plugs in. I'll usually go a couple years on a fuel filter, but if I'm due for a fuel filter, I'll put a fuel filter in there. I've got a K&N air filter on the bike, so I'll take the filter out, take a look at that, take a look at the carb throats and all that stuff, make sure everything's nice and clean. And then I'll get into doing a carburetor synchronization, which is pretty pivotal for, you know, whether your bike is carbed or injected. You know, in my opinion, it makes a massive difference having your carburetors or your throttle body synchronized. So same thing with the oil changes. You know, I basically do 2 oil changes a year. I'm using the Castrol 1040. It's a synthetic. I like using the K&N oil filters, mainly just because they're easy to get on and off. They've got like kind of like a nut built into the end of them. And I'm a huge fan of filter mag. I got a filter mag on the bike. I've got filter mag on everything. I got one on my Lincoln, on my Mustangs. And filter mag's another one of those things people like to cry about because, you know, they'll gladly go spend $200 drinking on a Friday night, but they can't part ways with $50 for a filter magnet that could save their engine. So that's up to you. If you don't want to spend 50 bucks for a filter mag, that's cool. If you like it and you want to buy it, go for it. I mean, I've used them. I'm a huge fan of them. That's where I'm at with it. So that's up to you. So the other big area of neglect on these bikes is the battery. So in my opinion, whether it's a car or a bike, get an AGM. AGM stands for Absorb Glass Mat. And actually in this black Mustang right here, it's exactly what I got in here now. Right there, AGM. The only vehicle I have that does not have an AGM is a white Mustang, and believe me, once the battery in there goes, it's getting an AGM. So, getting into the battery side of this stuff, you know, I've got a battery load tester because I just want to have one. That's not something you have to have. You know, you can always pull the battery out of your bike and take it to pretty much any auto parts store, and they'll usually load test them for free, so that's not really a must-have. But as far as battery must-haves, definitely get a battery maintainer. I cannot believe how many people I come across that do not have a battery maintainer for their motorcycle. It's just completely ridiculous. It's definitely a must-have. Buy one. Don't make excuses. Your bike needs it. Get it and use it. Don't get it and leave it sitting on a shelf. Get it and use it. Definitely need a battery maintainer. So, real quick on this battery maintainer, although there was a plethora of videos on my YouTube about this topic, so feel free to dive into that and learn more about it, but I'm just going to go over this real quick. You know, you have to understand, one of the common problems with this R6 that I hear about, that I have never had ever, is a stator going bad. Okay? And I guarantee you the stators go bad because people do not keep their batteries fully charged. So, get the battery maintainer. Use it. That way when you go to start the bike, the battery's at a full charge. The bike is going to start faster. It's going to take a lot of stress off that starter. And once that bike starts, the stator is not trying to charge a discharged battery. Okay? And that is going to go real far towards keeping that stator healthy. So definitely get a battery maintainer. The other thing you should consider getting is the digital voltmeter. It's going to help you do some diagnostic on the bike. You can also do open circuit test on the battery, check that stuff out. And then just getting into other maintenance stuff. You know, I use this, DuPont makes this chain degreaser. That stuff's pretty awesome. Got the PJ chain lube. You know, keeping your chain clean and lubricated is very important. It's going to go a long way towards the life of that chain, and it just makes life easier for your engine because it's not fighting a dirty chain trying to, you know, fight that chain around. So keeping the chain clean is pretty important. You know, keep it clean, keep it lubed up, make everything a lot easier for your bike. So some other little odds and ends. I'm going to get into some more carburetor stuff and the notorious ignition coils here, but You know, I like to use this Prep All wax and grease remover. That stuff is great. It's really good for, you know, a lot of times your chain is gonna just sling off whatever lubricants on it, especially after you clean it and lube it. You know, even if you let it sit overnight, it seems like the next ride you take, it's gonna sling something off of there. So it's definitely a good idea to have dedicated wax and grease remover. And you know, I'll try to get links for most of this stuff in the description, make it easier for you to find it. But I'm definitely a huge fan of wearing gloves. You definitely want to keep a lot of these chemicals off your hands. And I'll get you a link to some really nice microfiber towels. That's what I like to keep my bike clean. And I'm a pretty big fan of just using spray detailers to clean the bike. You know, in my opinion, the last thing I ever want to do to this bike is just take a hose to it and blast it with water. You know, watch these videos where these guys like use a foam cannon on their motorcycle. It's like, yeah, maybe they get away with it, but it kind of makes me cringe because, I don't know, for me personally, the last thing I want to do is blast this bike with water. And I mean, if you get caught, you know, people say, well, you know, you get caught in the rain. It's like, yeah, well, you know, sometimes you can't avoid the rain, but I can definitely avoid pulling out a hose and blasting my bike down with water. So that's kind of how I roll with that stuff. So I'm a huge fan of just, you know, the waterless washing, whether it's a spray detailer or something like this Ultimate Wash and Wax. You know, it's really quick and easy to clean the bike up with that stuff. And to me, like, the best way to keep your bike clean is just, you know, every time I ride it, I'll fire the bike up. You know, bike's got to warm up, whether it's carbureted or injected. I mean, with the carburetor, you're kind of forced. You know, with the fuel injection, it's like you guys should really give it a, you know, 3 to 5 minutes to kind of warm up and get the oil, get some heat in the oil and all that jazz. And to me, that's a perfect time to wipe the bike off. So I'll fire my bike up, you know, it's choked out, it's running on the choke, and I'll just wipe it off. And then as I'm wiping it off, I'll keep turning that choke down and get it down to an idle, finish wiping all the surfaces off. The bike looks super fresh, and, you know, it's had time to warm up, so that's always a good thing. So one of the biggest issues with this bike are these ignition coils. And I chased this ignition coil for a long time, which is kind of ridiculous because it's a pretty well known fact that these coils go bad. But I will say the testing I did on the coils, you know, pretty much led me to believe that they were okay, which I find funny about testing pretty much anything electrical. You know, the other factor is heat. So I mean, I tested these coils when they were cold. Chances are if I had had them on the bike and they were warmed up, maybe those results had been different. But these bikes are notorious for bad coils. And I ended up picking up the cheap Chinese ones because they're definitely a lot cheaper than going with Yamaha. And you know, so far they've been good to me. So if you're suspecting your coils, just replace them. You know, and like if you pick up a used R6, that'd be one of the first things I do. You know, I would get into, if I was to buy another R6, I would definitely be buying coils. I'd be getting an AGM battery. I'd be pulling the carbs off, going through those, making sure everything's all good, you know, doing an oil change. You know, it's like you want to, especially if you guys pick up a used bike, you know, you got to pretty much go through everything. Go through the brakes. You know, keep in mind the brakes use a .4. You know, you can get a pretty nice result from just bleeding the brakes down. You know, that's not even doing anything with the pads or rotors. But the other thing you can do with the brakes too, you know, you can get your pads off there. If you still got pretty good amount of pad and the rotors look okay, I would just get those pads off of there and then come back with some of this wax and grease remover and just clean off those rotors. And I would take like a 600 grit wet dry sandpaper and just scuff a layer off of those brake pads. You know, you don't want to get crazy, you just want to put a scuff on them. And then, you know, put it all back together and try to, you know, you're going to kind of want to bed them in. So I would do the front first and the backside second. So you've at least got one functioning end of the bike with brakes while you're trying to bed them in. But I think that goes a long way towards improving your brake performance. You know, you don't necessarily have to buy new stuff to make an improvement. So I would say between cleaning off those rotors, scuffing the pads, and doing a bleed job on the brakes, like, you might be shocked at how much better they work. And let's face it, with these bikes you definitely want the brakes to work. So one of the other things I got into with the electrical system that I think has kind of helped out with the stator too is, you know, I've got an HID conversion kit on this bike. And I'm a huge fan of HID. It requires less power. It just makes it that much easier on the charging system. You know, your stator is going to be a lot happier, and it just puts out way more light than the halogens do. So in my opinion, HID is a really good way to go. I've also got a HID harness on this bike, and I don't have high beams on this bike anymore. It's just a low beam kit. And then I've got it wired up so when I switch on the high beams, it'll fire up the low beams because I only have low beams. And the other benefit to that too is, you know, I can start the bike with the lights off, which also takes part of the load off of the charging system. So, you know, doing an HID conversion, running an AGM battery, you know, picking up a battery maintainer and using it, all those things are going to go a long way towards your bike starting a lot easier and you not having to buy parts. You know, your starter is going to last longer. Everything's going to, you know, the stator is going to last longer. It's just going to increase the lifespan of those parts on the bike. So, probably getting into the bread and butter of what's going to be an issue with this bike. You know, I've got videos about this and getting into making pilot jet adjustments and all that stuff. I personally highly recommend a jet kit. I know they're expensive. People cry because they're like $100 and you just get this little plastic box full of little parts and it seems really confusing. But you have to understand, you know, these bikes are basically tuned from the factory to pass emissions, okay? So there's a lot of compromises and there's a lot of meat left on the table as far as power is concerned. So I would say buying a jet kit was one of the biggest upgrades to this bike. You know, I put the K&N air filter on there and did the jet kit, and it made a tremendous difference. And that's something else too, while I'm on the topic of jet kits. You know, you have to be careful with this stuff. Like, and sometimes these guys will do like a full exhaust system and they don't rejet the carbs and they just have problems. You know, it's not difficult to lean these bikes out by modding them, especially since they're basically running lean from the factory to begin with. So I mean, if you got a stock bike, probably the best bang for the buck is going to be putting a jet kit in there. And I'll say this much too, like the bike just sounds, it just sounds more powerful sitting there at idle. Like the jet kit makes a tremendous difference. And quite honestly, you're going to want to pull these carbs apart anyways. And I'll show you why right now. These are the needles for the bowls. So each carburetor has a bowl. The bowl is filled with fuel, and this is what controls the flow of that fuel into the bowl. So the problem I had with my bike, as you can see right here, notice how that doesn't have a tip. And there's the tip that fell off. So the problem I was having with my bike, my number one cylinder was running super rich because this needle had broken and it was literally just dumping fuel into that bowl. So I literally, and it was like coming out of the vent, and it was coming out of the vent and getting sucked into the venturi. So it was just, the bike was all screwed up from that. So I'll get you guys a link to these things. This is definitely something that's got to be replaced, especially if you get a used bike. You know, if you got, I mean, let's face it, all these car bikes are getting on like 20 years old now. So if this hasn't been done, it needs to be done. So getting the jet kit, it's not mandatory, but it's definitely a good idea. Getting these needles is definitely mandatory, and the other thing that's mandatory is being able to adjust your pilot jets. So you pretty much got to get the carbs off the bike to do that, to pop those. They've got like little caps on them or whatever. You got to drill them out and yank those caps off. But once you do that, you can make adjustments to the pilot jet. I got pretty much a full video showing you how to do that. This is the tool I used, and then this is kind of like I ended up buying another one because the magnet in this one got kind of goofed up. So next time I do an adjustment, I'm going to use this new one. But this is kind of my package for doing my pilot jet adjustment. And I've got a little like vacuum cap, so when I take the line off of the fuel filter, I can put that vacuum cap on there and plug up the fuel so I'm not dripping fuel everywhere. It's another thing too, when you take that tank off, there's an on-off valve, a petcock valve on there to control the fuel flow. So you definitely want to shut that off, but you definitely want to remember to open that again when you put it back on the bike. And like I said, I've got a video about that. I got videos about most of this stuff. You know, I did a video about the coils where I talked about them. You know, I mean, this stuff's important, guys. You know, you got to have spark plugs that are functioning properly, and nothing is going to ruin your engine running properly worse than an ignition problem. You know, probably the worst thing about these ignition problems is they can be very intermittent, and they can be affected by heat too. You know, like I was mentioning earlier, you know, there's a good chance that even though this coil tested okay at room temperature, you know, if I got this thing out of a 200 degree bike, it'd probably be a different story. So definitely get into checking your coils out. Make sure you've got good plugs. The other thing is when you go to change the plugs, that's a good chance to just read your spark plugs. You know, that'll let you know if you got a bad mixture or something's going wrong. It's just kind of like, it's probably the best way to figure out what's really going on with your engine. It's almost like looking inside by looking at what's going on with that spark plug. And as far as reading them is concerned, you know, there's videos on YouTube about that. I haven't really made a video like that. I mean, I'm not really an expert at it. So I know what I know. I think I know enough to get by and to be able to make, you know, an educated guess about what may or may not be wrong with the bike. The other thing, going back to the HID, which I'll get you guys a link for this too, that is a 10-second delayed relay. And so if you have a bike where the lights come on with the key being turned on, if you convert to HID and the HID kit has a harness, you can swap out the relay in that harness for that 10-second delay relay, and that'll help you. You'll be able to start the bike up, and then the lights will automatically come on 10 seconds after you turn the key on. So once again, that's just a little way to take some of the load off take a little bit of the load off the electrical system, get you a little more longevity out of that stuff. The other thing is just getting into some of the tools. You know, I like to use this Craftsman ratchet when I'm working on the bike. It's got the bend in it, that's pretty nice. The 5mm hex head. The other thing I like to keep in my bike all the time, I've got this metric hex head set. So if something happens and I'm on the side of the road, you know, this just fits really nice in the back of the bike. I can strap that down in the back here, and actually I keep it in this bag. So I've got that at all times in case something happens. I'll be able to get something taken apart if I need to. The other thing that I think I failed to take out of the toolbox, found these screwdrivers, and they're called JIS, which I believe is Japanese industry standard. And these actually fit the screws on this bike. So I highly recommend getting the set of these screwdrivers, because especially for making adjustments when you're trying to synchronize the carburetors, these actually fit on the screws that you make the adjustment. So the tools you're going to need for making adjustments, I'd definitely pick up those screwdrivers. You know, you're going to need some kind of bit holder. And the other thing too is I've got, you know, it's like a flathead screw in there to make the adjustments for the pilot jet. So you're going to have to find a thin flathead bit to fit inside of this thing. Like if you were to buy this thing, it doesn't have that flathead in there, so you have to find one to fit it. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So yeah, stay up on your battery, get the battery maintainer, That's going to go a long way. Definitely stay on top of your fuel system. Like I said, I mean, I've really gotten into using the stable. You know, especially that the marine product seems to work pretty good. I've had pretty good luck with it thus far. You know, protect yourself too. Get the gloves, you know, and wear them. I mean, a lot of these chemicals, you really don't want to get them on your hands. And let's face it, it's just that much easier to clean your hands off if you've been wearing gloves. Especially get into cleaning the chain, something like that. You usually make a big mess. Same thing with doing an oil change. You know, used oil, it's basically a known carcinogen. Definitely don't want to get that stuff on your skin. You know, there's plenty of people on YouTube doing stuff like that. You know, I try to keep safety in mind at all times. The other thing too is if you decide to get into doing those brake pads, scuffing them up the way I was mentioning, definitely pick up some kind of dust mask. You know, you don't want to be breathing in whatever you sand off of those brake pads. Alright guys, so I think that's it. I think probably a lot of the problems with these motorcycles just boils down to maintenance. You know, it doesn't take much to affect how these things want to run. And I know a lot of people cry about this stuff too. You know, it's like, just get the auxiliary tank, get the synchronizing tool. It's going to make your life a lot easier. It's like everyone cries about how much this stuff costs, but you know, at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, it costs money, but you know, what's it worth to you? Do you want your bike to run right or not? I mean, that's kind of the choice you have to make there. So probably one more thing about the headlights too. Like, you got a lot of LED headlights coming out now. You might want to look into that. They're a little easier to install than HID. I don't know. I'm still kind of a pretty big fan of the HID kits. I did pick up some LED bulbs for my Mustang, but I haven't tried them yet, so I can't really say either way on those things. But you know, and then kind of going back to the paint maintenance stuff. I mean, keep your bike clean. You know, it's gonna look good. I mean, a lot of these bikes are pretty gorgeous. You know, keep them clean. You know, roll out, roll clean, show it off, and you know, it's just gonna protect the paint. And then down the road, if you're looking to get rid of the bike, you know, it's a lot easier to sell a bike that's clean than it is to sell one that's got faded paint that looks nasty. So, you know, it's kind of protecting your investment and just taking pride in what you got too, you know. To me, it doesn't matter what you're riding, you know, keep it clean, looks nice, everybody's happy. Alright guys, so like I said, I'll put links in there. And then just kind of recapping, you know, probably the biggest issues are going to be getting into these coils and, you know, inside the carb where these needles go for the float bowl. This thing is going to cause big problems if it goes wrong. So, but you know, that doesn't discount the fact that, you know, you got to have your spark plugs, you know, get your dielectric grease on there and all that stuff, you know. To me, it's like you have to have your general maintenance. And then beyond that, if you want to get into a jet kit and all that, you know, like I said, the jet kit's really not mandatory. I think you can get pretty good results just by adjusting your pilot jets. But the jet kit's definitely gonna, it's worth the money. I mean, if you like riding your bike and you're into hammering it, like, it's worth the money. I wouldn't hold back on that. Alright guys, I'm gonna link the, I got quite a few other videos about fixing stuff on this bike when I was having issues. Probably the other thing I hear a lot about is, I can't remember if it was like first gear or second gear, or I don't know, people having transmission problems. I can't really speak about that because I've never had any issues with my transmission. I don't know, this bike's pretty much always had synthetic oil in it ever since I got it back in '05. So I don't know if that's got something to do with it. Maybe that's got something to do with the filter mag. I mean, I've had a filter mag on that oil filter, you know, ever since I bought the bike, same thing. So I don't know if the filter mag caught something that might have ended up chewing up something in the transmission. I don't know. That seems like that's another common problem, but I haven't really had that problem. Same thing with the stator. I've never really had a problem with the stator on my bike. But like I said, you know, get that AGM battery, keep it charged up, get yourself the battery maintainer. You know, especially this SP3 comes with some really nice connectors that you can just hook on the battery, and then you can snake this out the side of the bike, and then you can just you know, makes it a lot easier to plug it in. So like on my bike, I just kind of made my own plug, but you know, I could just as easily have that plug coming out through the side of the bike over here. So it's just that much easier to get the maintainer hooked up. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you got any questions, you know, just leave them in the comment section. I'm more than happy to help somebody out. You know, it's always a good feeling when someone gets their bike fixed. I know how you guys feel. It's terrible when your bike's not running right. It's actually downright depressing. So, hopefully this video helped you out. You know, if you're an R6 guy, you know, let us know in the comments. And if you're some guy not rolling on an R6, tell us what kind of bike you got. And, you know, share your experiences. I mean, have you guys used any of these products? What do you think about them? What do you do and what works for you? You know, it's probably the best part about YouTube. We can all share our experiences and come up with solutions together. It's probably one of the best parts about doing this stuff. Alright guys, I hope this video was helpful. Like I said, for you R6 guys, the Gen 1 carbed bikes, I've got quite a few videos about doing stuff to the bike, so I'll link that at the end of the video. You guys can check that out. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.